And we'll be in chapter 5 of the 13th book of Yisrayl, part 2, Gold, Pure, Fine Gold. And we'll be starting off here on chapter 5. Now, there's a lot to cover tonight, so we're going to probably be moving quite rapidly. But the title of this is "The Peace Plan is About to Start Again, and they will declare peace, peace, and then will come nuclear wars, destroying 1/3 of the part of man over 1/4 part of the earth." And this was dated 8/3/2013. And Pastor starts out here in verse 2, and this is really important what he's talking about here. When first thing he starts out with, he says, "I'm really excited right now about our teachers." About our teachers. And what has he been really pushing forth? What is he really trying to get everybody involved in? Is this peaceful solution, the certification course that is coming about, that is actually being conducted now. And he says, and of course I want everyone in the house to be a teacher, and he's making it possible. It's possible for everyone here to go through this course and to become a certified teacher of the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. He says that's what you're here for. That's why we've been called here. We've been called to this house to learn what to teach so we can go forth and teach what we've learned, because we're going to see the importance of what it is, we're going to see the importance of why we've been called to be teachers. See, the world has no idea what their purpose on life, what their purpose on this earth is. Well, we know what our purpose is. We know what we've been called to do. We have been called and brought here to be teachers, to learn how to be teachers. And Pastor shows here, he says, that's what you're here for, to be teachers, to bring forth fruit. And he says here, as it was brought out, he says, you've got to stay connected to the branch. And we know who the branch is, right? We have to stay connected to the branch. Why would it be important to stay connected to the branch? Who is the branch connected to? The branch is connected to Yeshua and connected to Yahweh. And if you don't stay connected to the branch, your fruit will shrivel and die. Just like if you take a fruit tree and if you cut a branch off of the fruit tree, or if you cut the fruit, you separate the fruit off of the fruit tree, that fruit is going to die because it's been cut off from the life source. It's been cut off from all source of nutrients. And it's important that we stay connected to the branch, because the branch, our pastor, is our connection to Yeshua and our connection to Yahweh. Don't let anybody fool you into thinking that they can have a direct connection with Yahweh or Yeshua on their own. They cannot. Scripturally, they cannot. They delude themselves. They err not knowing the Scriptures. So it is important that we stay connected to this branch. You think about Eve. Remember in one of the books Pastor wrote here, he wrote about the deception with Eve. And he says in there, how was Eve deceived? Well, Eve was deceived because she had a rebellious attitude, and she went to someone other than her head to teach her. She went to someone. That would be like somebody leaving and not going to the branch, cutting themselves off from the branch and going somewhere else to learn. It can't be done. That rebellious attitude is what causes that. And that rebellious attitude will cause people to fall. They will fall away. But that is how we can avoid being deceived. We can avoid falling into this deception if we just humble ourselves and submit ourselves to the one whom Yahweh has sent. You know, it's been proven to us over and over and over that this is Yahweh's established house, that this is the only work of Yahweh on the face of the earth, and that our pastor and overseer, the great Kohan Yisrayl Hawkins, is the one sent to be the spokesman in these last days. Now, Pastor, he shows here, he says, he continues here, and he shows that the news media, he exposes, Pastor, in this article here, he exposes the system. The system, he points out how Pope Francis had recently, as of this time, made some comments against the gays. He said, and I do not, Pastor says, I do not condemn gays, and I wouldn't poke fun at them. I wouldn't humiliate them. That's not our job. He says this beastly Nimrod system has taught them, has caused these people to be who and what they are. They're only doing what they've been taught. They haven't been taught righteousness, but they're only doing what they have been taught. And it's the same thing with anything. It's the same thing with thieves. Thieves are only doing what they've been taught. Murderers are only doing what they've been taught. This whole world is going their own way because that's what they have been taught. You know, the system that comes forth from the religions that came against Abel, and this is what this system is. It says the system that came against Abel then went out from that to what we see in the Nimrod system of building weapons of war and trying to overcome and force the people into compliance. Peace through strength. That has been the way it has been going for 6,000 years, and has it brought peace anywhere? No. Peace through strength will never work. Peace through education is the only thing that will. And it's from this same system that has brought forth these evil school shootings. And Pastor says here, he says, we should be trying to help these people overcome. This is the importance of us becoming teachers, because this is how we're going to help the people overcome. You know, and they can overcome any problem that they have. It doesn't matter what it is, it doesn't matter, anything. The peaceful solution can and does have the answers for that. And this is what we're striving to learn. You know, we're striving to learn how to properly teach that so that we can fulfill our commission and go out and help these people. We can go out and help stop the war, stop the hell, the disease, and everything that we see going on in this world. That's our purpose. That's why we're here. You know, Cain was told, remember what Cain was told. Cain was told that the desire to sin is with you, but you must overcome it. Now think about what Yahweh told Cain. The desire to sin is with you, but you must overcome it, which means what? That desire can be overcome. And the only way it can be overcome is through the proper education. Now, we wouldn't be told to overcome something or to do something if we couldn't do it. Yahweh would be setting us up for failure, right? Yahweh doesn't set us up for failure. He sets us up in every single way for success. We just have to grab hold of the instruction and run with it and follow it. But the way they're going to overcome this is through education. And think about this, is through education. Well, to receive an education, there must be educators, right? There's got to be teachers. In order to teach somebody, there has to be someone to teach it. And this is why we're here. You know, in Isaiah chapter 2, remember, it shows there in Isaiah chapter 2, it says, many will say, let us go up to the mountain of Yahweh. To do what? Up to the house of Jacob, to learn of his ways, to learn of the ways of Father Yahweh, and to walk in his paths, to walk in the paths of righteousness. And in doing that, they will beat their swords into plowshares, it shows, and their spears into pruning hooks. And then it shows, this says, nation will not lift up sword against nation, neither will they learn war anymore. War will no longer be taught. You know, don't let anybody kid you. You know, it doesn't matter how pious somebody looks, you know, how righteous in appearance somebody looks out in the world. By their fruits, you're going to know them. And if they teach against the laws of Yahweh, they're teaching war. They're teaching people, they're teaching war, they're teaching hatred, they're teaching people to go out and become sick and die. So, you know, don't judge by appearances, but judge, you know, we have to look at them by their fruits. By their fruits, Yahshua showed that we will know them. And, you know, you think about the articles and stuff that Pastor has been writing, these letters going out, you know, to Al-Qaeda, you know, showing that, you know, that they don't have to fight. They think they're being backed into a war, you know, but there are alternatives. And Pastor took that news article, that newsletter, if you remember, and he showed the alternative there. But he shows, remember, if Pastor shows, he says if people were taught correctly, then they would stop, you know, if they were taught correctly, and he shows that the churches, they stopped teaching health. They stopped teaching the laws of Yahweh. They stopped teaching the clean and the unclean food laws. They stopped teaching the things that cause people to get sick. And he shows here, he says, and what they turned to, what they started teaching were drugs. Oh, don't let anybody get in, don't let anybody stop you from enjoying life. Go ahead and enjoy it to the fullest, even though you get sick. We'll make this drug so you don't feel the pain. You don't feel the disease deteriorating your body. And that's what the drugs do. The drugs mask the symptoms. Remember, there's no cure. And Pastor, he talks about the, about the hospitals and how they really don't offer, anything. There's not much that they offer at all. Let's see here. Now, boy, I tell you, this is time just flies. Let me see here. And you think about pastors, speaking to the news agencies, to the news media, giving this information out. And he brings the example of Abelin, of how Abelin, rejected Yahweh, and that's why he won't voluntarily, give them, grant them any interviews or anything like that anymore, because they rejected Yahweh. And as a result, with 3 major Christian universities here in Abelin, look at the sickness and disease and the suffering and the crime and on all of this that's going on. I mean, it's unbelievable when you take a look and you see just how bad things are. Children are being born with cancer, as he shows. People that are adults have cancer, and they go to the hospital to get treatment. Well, the only thing the hospitals can do is they don't offer cures. They don't have any cures. They can relieve the symptoms for a little while, and at the same time of relieving the symptoms, they're also relieving the people of their hard-earned money. They're relieving them of their bank accounts. And Pastor, he makes a point here. He says there's an old joke, but it shows a reality. He says, it says, people work like hell and I live in town, where I work like hell to live on the farm, where I work like hell to move back to the city. And he said it's like Satan running to and fro, and they're hunting something they just don't know what they're hunting. Well, the world is hunting peace. They're hunting health. They're hunting what we have here in Yahweh's house. What is offered here is what the world wants, but they reject it. They won't be rejecting it for long, but you can see they're ever searching, just like like it was in Genesis. Remember when Cain said, he would be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth. Remember what that fugitive and a vagabond meant? It means ever searching for peace. And since that time, mankind has ever been searching for peace. Not only through peace through wars, not only peace in the communities, but also peace within their own bodies because of the diseases and stuff that they've brought upon themselves. Remember, a curse causeless will not come. So when we see these things out there, there's no such thing as a naturally occurring disease like this. These things are brought on. These things are brought on by our own actions. Now, and this should bring us, bring us back to, and Pastor, he shows here in verse 21 over here on page 34, he shows us the reason for this. He says, this sickness that Abelin has, and the churches are following this system that stopped teaching these laws, and he points out and points squarely the blame, for these diseases being taught, and it's because the churches have stopped teaching the laws of Yahweh. They quit teaching these things. When they quit teaching, don't commit fornication, don't commit adultery, don't commit bestiality, sodomy, don't commit these things. Don't eat these unclean foods. When they stop teaching those, because those are laws that would keep people healthy, they would keep them safe. So when those laws were taught, when those laws are not taught, then the churches are actually teaching them to go ahead and become sick. Isaiah 24, 1 through 6 shows that. Remember that the churches, it's because of the actions of the church leaders in not teaching the laws of Yahweh. Remember what Isaiah 24, 1 through 6 shows? Behold, the earth is empty and it is made waste. The earth is made empty and made waste, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing here, and the inhabitants are scattered abroad. And it's because mankind they've transgressed the laws, they've changed the ordinances, and they've broken the everlasting covenant. And remember, he shows why that the earth has become that way, why the earth has become defiled. And when you study in Isaiah 24, 1 through 6, you see it's not just mankind, but it's every living thing. It includes the microorganisms, the things that make up the air, that make up the soil, everything. And as we're learning in our microbiology class, everything is made up of microorganisms. The air is made up of these microorganisms as well. So there isn't anything that goes that is escaped. And the Pope, he shows here that the Pope is trying to strengthen the Roman Empire. He's trying to bring that back, and he shows here, he says, we have the reports as of the 1st of September, where anyone who reports the rape of a child in the Vatican will serve 30 to 35 years in the penitentiary. So anyone who reports a crime in the Vatican, would be subject to imprisonment. He says they know what they're doing, but they're going to put a hush on anyone trying to report it. They're trying to sweep it under the rug. They're trying to keep it out of the news and trying to keep people from reporting it. But over on page 35, this is really interesting. I hadn't thought about this until I was preparing for this class here. But he says here in verse 31 here, he says, you might start thinking about this in your studies, everyone. In your studies, the life of Moshe, which Yahweh compares to this work right now. Remember, Yahweh compared the work in these last days to the work of Moshe. And he says, Yahweh says that you will no longer hear about Moshe and his coming out of Egypt with the 12 tribes, but you're going to start hearing here soon of this last generation that comes from all nations, and it's going to completely overshadow that work. The work that's being done in these last days is going to completely overshadow that work. Now, that's what we kind of see. That's what we kind of see to begin with, but Pastor breaks it down a little bit further. He says, Moshe's life was split up into 3 40-year cycles. Everybody remember that? I didn't, not until I was reading this again. But Moshe's life was split up into 3 40-year cycles. And Pastor shows here, he shows how he was 40 years old when Yahweh brought him out of Egypt. And then Pastor goes to explain, it was actually in his 39th year. And he goes to explain that a little bit more. But just for the simplicity's sake and for going through this, he shows here, but Moshe was actually 39, which was his 40th year of life when he was sent out of Egypt. And notice that was the first part of his life. Then the second part of his life, you see, he trained for 40 years, which made him 79 years, actually not 80, but in his 80th year, which was 79 going into his 80th year. Now, there was a third time period. So you've got the time period when he was 40 years old when he brought him out of Egypt. He trained for 40 years. And then the next one, now there was one more 40-year period after that training took place, and it was in Galilee with Yisrayl. Moshe trained for 40 years, and then Yahweh sent him back. And when he was 79 or 80 years old, when Yahweh sent him back to Egypt to get those 12 tribes. Okay, so there were 3 different distinct time periods there. And he brings that, he shows how we have the similar 3 different distinct time periods. And he shows here, he says, now ours, our third, going into this third one now, he says ours is going to be cut short. It's not going to be, 40 years like Moshe's was. But it's going to be cut short because of bombs, because of the nuclear wars, because of the wars that are going to take place. Remember, this work is going to be cut short. And then we see here about 4/5 of the Earth's population is going to be wiped out, and we're going to be dealing with the rest of them in a training period that's going to continue on. And when you will have, he talks about this power, we're going to be given authority for salvation or eternal life, and have been given authority over it. And he shows here, he says, he points out, he says, they don't have it yet, and they won't receive it except through you, except through us. We are going to be the ones that are going to bring salvation and teach the way of salvation to the 2 billion. Do you realize that? Think about the job. Think about what's being placed for us and the immense responsibility and the huge opportunity that we have placed before us. And Yahweh shows, he says, that you're going to be the first to receive the powers that will actually turn the planets around, to turn the whole creation around. All things that Yahweh's fingers have framed, you are the ones, and if you could get this in your mind, if you overcome, and if you will submit, and if you will humble yourselves, then Yahweh can use you, and you will be given this great authority that is spoken of in Genesis 1, where he says, I'm going to make mankind in my image. And we're doing that now. We're slowly but surely being made into mankind, into Yahweh's image and likeness. The more we practice Yahweh's laws, the more we become like Yahweh, the more we take on his righteous character. And this is what Yahweh wants built within us, the same character that he has to always choose righteousness. So that never again will we see, will we have to see the devastation that's going to be coming on this earth. Remember, Yeshua said that this is going to be a time of trouble like no man has ever seen. There's never been a time of trouble like it, and there never will again. Now, if you really think about that, it's going to be pretty devastating. It's going to be immense. It's going to be, I don't think we can really even fathom how devastating that it's going to be. And this is why Pastor tells us to be grounded, to study to show ourselves approved, and to be fully grounded in this work. So that our faith, so that we're not going to falter, so that we have no doubts whatsoever that Yahweh is going to pull his people through this. Yahweh is going to pull us through this. He says it, he promises it, it's going to be done. And then he shows here, he says that no one is going to make it without this remnant here. Remember, it said that those that went before us, who have gone to sleep without receiving the reward, that they without us will not be made perfect. We have to come through the worst time of trouble ever. And in doing so, we're going to prove that no matter what is put before us, no matter what we go through, that we are going to stand strong, and we are not willfully going to choose to sin ever again. And we're being trained, and this is why we're being trained. We're being trained for this opportunity, and where he's going to use us, he shows here, to resurrect the dead. Now, remember here this time period that we're in, when they say they have achieved true peace, the wars that are going to start. And the pastor shows here, he says, it's the big war. It's not the little ones. It's that nuclear war, as the great Kahan Yedidia brought out several times, and he's continuing to bring out. Even though he is away on a temporary job assignment, because that's what it is. He is away because Yahweh needs him where he is right now. So he is out doing his job. And when his job is finished, he's coming home. Make no doubt about it. Now, Pastor shows here, he says, he says to turn to Daniel to show you, to show that, this prophecy of this great tribulation here. And he says that this Vatican is making some moves to tighten down, to resurrect the Roman Empire, and to push it by force. Trying to resurrect the Crusades, going back, going through and trying to force the people back at this time. But Pastor shows here, he says they want to bring this back again, and they want complete force. And, he shows here that this is, this is what Malachi Martin was talking about in the book, The Keys of This Blood. He shows here, it says, that book was written with the understanding that most of this world doesn't have today, and that is, and we need to remember this, that the 12 tribes right now are still ruling. They have split up into different sections, but they're working together, the 12 tribes, and they're going to bring war against each other just like they did in Israel, just like they did in the past. There's nothing new under the sun, right? And he shows here, remember, the Pope hopes to come out on top. The United States hopes to come out on top. And then he has this warning about Russia. It says, Russia is this big teddy bear, he shows, but you can only provoke a teddy bear. You can only provoke a bear so long before he turns around on you. And Pastor shows here, he says, Russia has teamed up with China, and you're seeing that more and more. If you look in the news, you're seeing these little cat and mouse games playing in different areas of the world. Russia coming into the U.S. airspace and vice versa. So you can kind of see these things, these tensions and stuff starting to build. And then remember in Daniel 12 shows, and those who are wise, remember those who are wise. Remember what Pastor showed that meant? Those who are wise will shine. He was talking about teachers, remember? He showed how that center reference made reference to teachers. You see, this whole thing is talking about us becoming teachers to bring peace to this world. That's what we're training for. The house of Yahweh is the wise one, the light of the world. And as Yahshua has said, and that is taking the message now to all nations, the nations are beginning to respond. The light that is going out, the message. The message of, what's going on as far as you look at the newsletters, the prophetic word, the satellite TV, the radio, internet, Skype, and the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. It's all going out. And the veil of deception is being removed from this world. The things that were once in darkness are being made manifest by the light now. By the light that comes forth through this house. And there can be no doubt about that. We can have absolutely no doubt about that. No matter what they try to do to suppress the truth. Remember what they did back in Jeremiah's day. You don't prophesy in the name of Yahweh. You don't use that name. Well, what did the Catholic Church? What did they do? I say fairly recently, but it's been several years now. What did they say? They even acknowledge the name of Yahweh in the catechisms of the Catholic Church. But they rationalize and justify it away. Say, well, it doesn't matter what you call him because we go by this other name, this, that, and the other. Okay? But it's the same thing that they did back in the days of Jeremiah. And the Pope said, well, we're not going to use that name anymore. We're going to take it out. And nobody needs to be using that name. Sound familiar? Same thing that was done in the days of old. Remember, there's nothing new under the sun. No matter how hard they try, though, no matter how hard anybody tries to suppress this work, it's not going to be put in the grave. That's another promise of Yahweh. This work is not going to be allowed to be put in the grave. It's going to continue. This is the westernmost lamp of that 7-lamp lampstand that you see lit every Sabbath. That light will never go out. It will continue to shine. And this, all of these things that we're seeing here. You think about all the deception that has taken place, the changing of the laws, the changing of the feast days. The Catholic Church, changing the Sabbath from, trying to change the Sabbath from the seventh day of the week to the first day of the week. And everybody followed suit. And then when challenged and asked, well, what authority do you have? Well, because we said so. And nobody challenged us. And that was because everybody who challenged them was silenced. But by their own authority. They came by their own authority. And remember what Yahshua said? People come in their own authority and they're going to be accepted. But I come in the name of my Father. I come in the name of Yahweh, the creator of the universe, to put an end to all of these things that you see out here. The sickness, disease, war, bitterness, hatred, all of these things. I have a solution for it, and yet you reject me. They want to continue. They want to continue in that, they continue in that darkness. Well, slowly but surely, this is going away. Slowly but surely the dawn is coming. They're going to see it. It's slowly getting more and more people are becoming more and more active. They're seeing more and more of these things, and more people are being drawn into Yahweh's house. And when the remnant has been completed, when the number that Yahweh wants to reach has been completed, you know what's going to take place? The great nuclear wars are going to take place. So wait for it. Though it seems slow, wait for it, because it is going to come to pass. So with that, men, may Yahweh be with you and bless you. And if everyone will please stand, I'm going to turn the class over to the great Kahan, David Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone. It's an honor and privilege to address Yahweh's called out ones. You may be seated. We're going to continue in the 13th book of Israel. We're studying on chapter 5 this evening. The peace plan, it's about to start again. They will declare peace, peace. Then will come nuclear war, destroying 1/3 part of man over the 4th part of the earth. And so we're going to continue where the great Kohan left off on page 38. If you want to turn over to page 38. I'd like to start with the scripture that Daniel 7:25, and he will speak great words against Yahweh, and think to change times and laws, and they will be given into his hand until a time, times, and a dividing of times. And this is the time period we're in right now, time, times, and dividing of times. And Pastor writes here, first of all, he gives a reference to the Bible itself. Now, we got our Bible back about 100 years ago. He said it came out around 1600, several hundred years ago. It came out about 1600. It kept away from the entire world until it was finally given permission to be printed, and the printing press was invented around that time. And several people were killed because of that, because it was finally reprinted. Now, that was about 1600. And then it took a few years to get to the end of the earth. He's speaking of Oklahoma, the unassigned territories, the ends of the earth, where he was raised, and his parents, mother in particular, read the Bible every day to the children there, which is what is a great example for all of us. But it got to the end of the earth where Yahweh had prophesied a work would actually be born at that time. That was the beginning of the birth of a baby. And he's speaking of himself and his brother Jacob, the two witnesses. And it gives you this time and a divided time. Well, if you know what that is, you'll know what occurred with former Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, the Prime Minister of Israel, U.S. President Bill Clinton, and former PLO leader Yasser Arafat. And these were the three that signed the peace treaty on September 13th of 1993. And the pastor comments here that this news was caught in the sound room on tape, and we listened to it many times in the following years about the 7-year peace treaty. 7 years. Now, if you look at verse 54 there, well, see, I wrote about the peace plan in the 70s in a book called The Mark of the Beast. Then it was signed September the 13th of 1993. That's the same peace plan now that they're giving 9 months to get back into order. So when this sermon was written, it was direct negotiations between Israel, between John Kerry for the United States, and the Palestinian organization. And they specifically said, we hope to accomplish this in 9 months. Well, that 9 months turned out to be a failure. At the end of 9 months, they declared it to be a total failure. So that in itself is prophetic, in that there shall be no peace in this time period. And with respect to the declaring of peace, we can, let's just continue here, and I'll get to the next point here. But that's the same peace plan now that they're giving 9 months to get back in order, because it's split up into 3 time periods. And they call these trimesters here. First trimester, second trimester, and the last trimester, as in the birth of a child. You know, so it was quite prophetic how they described this. So he said this is going to be hidden now. It's going to be sealed until the time, times, and dividing of time, which we know this is this generation, as Yeshua said, for this time, and the dividing of time, or the 7-year peace agreement would be signed. Then it would stop at a certain time. Then it would start again and be finished. and then when the nuclear war was actually turned loose, and that's what we're waiting for now. In verse 55 here, Pastor says, the Oslo Accord is the last thing, and then they will say peace through peace, as it says in Thessalonians. If you want to turn over, we'll reference that. 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 3, I'd like to read 1 through 3. Now concerning the times, which is what we're in right now, the last time, and the seasons, brother, you have no need that I should write to you, for you yourselves know perfectly well that the day of Yahweh so comes as a thief in the night. In other words, you're going to understand it because you're looking for these prophecies. You're interested in the prophecies. You have an understanding. Yeshua is unlocking your minds to understand the prophecies. But notice verse 3. But when they say peace through peace, and they said this in 1993, when the three of them, Rabin, Arafat, Clinton shook hands on the White House lawn when they signed this peace. The newspapers, the world media proclaimed peace, peace, true peace. And they said, shalom, shalom, peace, peace. So this has been proclaimed. It doesn't need to be proclaimed again. For when they will say peace, true peace, then sudden destruction comes upon them as labor pains upon a woman. And there's the 9 months. There's the 9-month reference, the 9-month gestation of a woman with child, and they will not escape. So that's, but that's what was going on when Pastor delivered this sermon. But that process ended in failure. Let's continue here. In Daniel, it says, "Shut up the words," verse 25, and to think to change times, Yahweh's feast days and laws, and they will be given into his hands. So these changes, the changing of the Sabbath from the seventh day to the first day, that was given into the hands of the false prophets. But this, in this time period, the times, and dividing of times, it's changing back. The House of Yahweh is established. We're learning and we're spreading that Pastor Hawkins, Yahweh's Last Days Witness, is spreading the message that, this is the name of Yahweh, this is the Sabbath, and he's also teaching servitude, which Yeshua taught to, by his example. They will be given into his hand. That is the taking away of the laws, changing of the laws, doing away with them, killing off of the saints. This went on for years, almost 2,000 years, before Yahweh finally brought it back to you, for you here, so you could train in the laws of Yahweh, be wise, and turn many to righteousness. Righteousness is the keeping of Yahweh's laws. You can be part of this work, Pastor says, if you humble yourselves and become a part of this work and really set your mind on it. You can qualify for this position. There's a short time left, a very short time. Within the context of history, this is a very short time period even from 1962 when the witnesses started preaching the message with their radio program. Remember, chapter 7 says, it'll be given into his hand until this time, and the dividing of time. At that time, you see the wise people made wise, and then turn many to righteousness. He's prophesied a work here that's going on, that would go on, that would reach the entire world. And through the media today, the internet, satellite television, this message is going to all the world. Never before in history, until the knowledge increased in this last generation, has that been possible. In Daniel 12:4, "But you, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end." This is the time of the end. Let's say it, you could say it began with the birth of the witness in 34, or the birth of the witness Jacob in 26, but it certainly, you could say it began in 62 when the two of them started ministering together. And 50 years later, count 50, count 50 to the harvest time. That's where we are right now in history. We're at the harvest time. To the time of the end, many will run to and fro. That's rush, he says, means rush, to and fro, like we are today, rush to and fro, and knowledge will be increased in that time period when we will turn many to righteousness. Daniel 25, fight against the saints, will wear out, mentally attack, and cause to fall away the saints of Yahweh. We've got to be strong. We've got to be determined that we're going to endure until the end. Run the race with endurance. Not going to sprint to the finish line and burn out. We're going to run the race with endurance. If we set our minds to do it, Yahweh promises that he won't test us beyond what we can handle. To fall away from following the inspired prophets, Pastor says here. And then he changes topics a little bit here. He goes to Jeremiah chapter 23, and coincidentally, Pastor's talking much about that in his sermons here recently. "But woe to the pastors, shepherds, who destroy and scatter my sheep, the sheep of my pasture. Therefore, this is what Yahweh, Father of Israel, says against the pastors who feed my people You have scattered my flock and driven them away, and have not visited them. Behold, you are going to be called to account for the evil of your doing, says Yahweh. And then in verse 5, behold, the day comes, says Yahweh, that I will raise to David a righteous branch. And who is the righteous branch? Yisrayl Abel Hawkins is the righteous branch. He says here, a righteous branch. Now, Yeshua is not the branch. Yeshua is the vine. And a king, the prophecy continues here, will reign and succeed and will execute judgment and justice in the earth. Pastor's a king to us. He's a king to Yahweh in this last generation. He is the one sent, the one chosen to be the leader of this congregation, the great House of Yahweh. he and his brother who helped establish it. So and a king will reign and succeed and will execute judgment, the judgment of Yahweh's laws, and justice in the earth. That's what we're doing right now, Pastor says here. Then in verse 66, in his days Yahweh will be saved. Yes, now has come salvation. Only now has come salvation in this generation. People qualified, people were given authority to become the sons of Yahweh. They actually lived a life that actually gave them authority to become the sons of Yahweh, but they haven't yet. Only one has made it. He is Yeshua, of course, who sits at the right hand of Yahweh. The others won't make it until you make it to them. In other words, we're going to be a blessing to those who are resting in the grave at this time. That's what he means by that. That's part of your job in resurrecting the dead. Those people are going to have to be caught up to, or in other words, brought up to date. They're going to have to be taught the many things that we've learned, the history of these last generations and the completion of Yahweh's plan, this perfect plan, and then you'll make it possible for them because they already have the authority, they've qualified, but to become the sons of Yahweh, they just got to be trained and brought up to date, okay? And that's part of our job. And the scripture continues, in his days Yahweh will be saved, and Israel will dwell safely, and this is the name that he will proclaim to them, Yahweh Tsidkenu, Yahweh our righteousness. Therefore, behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that they will no longer say, as surely as Yahweh lives, who brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. No, they're going to talk about this generation. They have that history. They're going to talk about this generation, this congregation that brought the 2 billion people out of the world and taught them and brought up to date those who are part of the first resurrection. That was in Moshe's day, and the word brought up was actually including Moshe as it speaks of the 2 witnesses, or the last day's witness, who was brought up by a woman in the ends of the earth to actually teach Yahweh's way today so you can train and be wise and bring forth fruit to the house of Yahweh. Okay, so on verse 70 here, and you can make it, and you can't make it. We start that over and make it perfectly clear here. And you, me, no one can make it without the branch. You can't make it without the vine. Yeshua plainly said that. If you don't believe it, you're a fool, and you'll burn for it, burn in hell, not ever believing the word of Yahweh. So Yahweh makes it crystal clear to us, the words of the prophets, and Yahweh is so incredible with his prophecies. Yahweh's painting a beautiful picture right now. When you look at the model over there, every dimension on there is scripturally correct. Yahweh designed that the temple. The model, and he designed those buildings, and he's the greatest architect engineer in the universe. He's the only one really, and it's the same thing with these prophecies. When the entire picture of these prophecies in these last days is understood, it's going to be just a beautiful picture, or you can call it a million-piece puzzle with every piece fitting exactly in its right place. That's how incredible Yahweh's mind is. So, stand back and behold the power of Yahweh. We're all going to behold it. Verse 71 here. But they will say, as surely as Yahweh lives, who brought up and led the seed of the house of Israel. And Pastor says, the seed of Abraham, as you see the seed of Abraham, if you believe in the branch, believe in the work, not come against it, not fight against it, not believe into, whatever you're assigned to do, do with all your might. Yahweh said that's the law. We're given talents, use the talents we've got, multiply what we have, and multiply it abundantly, and Yahweh will bless us abundantly. Abel was a righteous priest. Cain hated Abel because he taught righteousness. He taught there's only one way, and this is it. It's got to be this way. Well, Cain solved his problem, he thought, by killing Abel, and of course, this started continual war, trying to force people, which is exactly the pattern you see in the world today. This pattern of continual war. And in verse 74, the scripture continues here, into the protected place at Abel and from all countries where they have been driven, and they will dwell in their own land. Pastor says his work will stay right here, as it's shown in the scripture. He's creating another work here to restore righteousness. And then down here in Jeremiah 23 and verse 14, I'm on verse 76 now. I have also seen in the prophets of Jerusalem, and this is where, Yeshua contended with these false prophets in Jerusalem, the priesthood that was moved to Rome when the temple was destroyed in 70 A.D., and we see the children of these prophets of Jerusalem in Rome right now. These were not the prophets of Yahweh. The prophets of Yahweh were in Galilee. Remember, Yachanan, or John, was one of those prophets. Yachanan was one of those prophets. He went up to Jerusalem and said, you're not living by the laws of Yahweh, and they cut off his head. That's their way of solving problems. Okay, that's not Yahweh's way. Okay, verse 77. Yahweh's way is to teach. Yahweh's way is to teach the peaceful solution. We see some of the world events recently. We see, innocent people being killed. That's the perpetrators of those heinous acts, deeds. They haven't been taught the peaceful solution. They've been taught the way of Cain. That's Cain's way. When we see these world events like recently, that situation where these people were murdered in that church, that's Cain's way. That's the teaching of Cain right there. That's plain and the very plain example of it. I have also seen in the prophets of Jerusalem a horrible thing. They commit adultery and walk in lies. They also strengthen the hands of evildoers so that no one turns from his wickedness. All of them are like Sodom to me, and her inhabitants are like Gomorrah. And this is another trend in the world today, the proliferation of Sodom and Gomorrah, and the breaking of those laws, the laws pertaining to righteous conduct. Therefore, this is what Yahweh our Father says concerning these prophets. Behold, they will be fed with wormwood, and they will be made to drink the water of gall, for from the prophets of Jerusalem comes profaneness. Has gone out into the land. And the word land here, it means all the earth. This profaneness, the way of Cain, has spread throughout the entire earth. And in verse 80 here, but in the last days he's going to establish a house, a branch, from the vine that's hooked to the rock, Yahweh. And from that is going to come forth the gold and oil of Yahweh's laws and his prophecies that make them wise and great understanding, so they can turn many to righteousness. I'm going to go over to verse 83 here. Here we see that this great tribulation is going to come. We see the quartet here, starting in Revelation 6, and to explain what's going on right now in the Vatican, of course, United States, Great Britain, and Israel, and this is the prophecy that was their attempts to bring peace at this time in history. They failed. They totally failed. We see the three colors of the nuclear bomb, Pastor says here, that's going to be used here. But by these three, 1/3 of men will be killed, and by this nuclear war that we are looking for can break loose at any time. They're already, pastors brought forth articles, and the news media has shown that they're already using tactical nuclear weapons in Syria, in Iraq, actually Syria, I think primarily. But they're already, this nuclear war to some extent is already going on. It's just that the fireworks show is starting out small. You're going to see the big ones at the end of the show, and that's what's coming. Revelation 9:20, and the rest of the men who were not killed by these plagues still did not repent of the works of their hands, that they should not worship demons and gods. Verse 21, neither did they repent of their murders. And then Pastor goes on here, he says, there's a war that kills the biggest portion, and then you have, after the wars, you have abortions, which is an ongoing form of murder. You have drugs, and the drugs, it says, that is also shown here in pharmaceuticals, sorceries and pharmaceuticals. I recently witnessed a news interview with an elderly man up in the northern part of the United States, and he was commenting on the economic situation in his area there. They were interviewing him, and he said, there's plenty of jobs in this area, but only half of the applicants can pass the drug test. And that's another way the world is going right now. Only half of the applicants, the job applicants, can pass the drug test. Then you have the fornication and the theft. Fornication and theft. Fornication, if you just notice what Yeshua said and remember it closely, it starts with illegal lust, and you've lusted after her in your heart. And for your notes, you can write down Jacob chapter 1, verses 13 through 15. Jacob 1, 13 through 15. To me, it's the best example of what he's talking about here. The progression that from lust to sin that leads to death. Those are the three best verses that I could cite regarding lust, illegal lust. Yachanan Mark 4, verse 13, Pastor says, we want you to guard all times. Be on guard yourself. Proverbs 4, verse 23 says, guard our minds. Guard your mind. Guard it at all times. Don't let this occur. Remember, Yosef was strong, and he gives the example of how Yosef resisted the illegal lust that was imposed upon him or set before him. He resisted that. Well, we said, the House of Yahweh said, the priest said that they all agree that we're going to stop sin in the House of Yahweh. And that's our purpose. Teach the law, practice the law, keep the law. One thing we need to, and then Pastor goes on to another point here. He says, one thing we need to quit drinking. We need to quit drinking alcohol. Let's be like the Savior, we said, because a lot of people were losing it when they were drinking. I'll read that again. This is a reason. Pastor doesn't always give a reason when he says stop drinking, but here's the reason. He says, because a lot of people were losing it when they were drinking. So in other words, they couldn't control their drinking. Okay, so let's all stop drinking. May give us a little heartburn once in a while, but it has a righteous purpose, in stopping drinking. Alcohol, it can be a very negative influence on our salvation. We can make terrible mistakes under the influence of alcohol. So, this advice that Pastor gave us to stop drinking, we all need to stop drinking. There's no need for it at this time. So, and it's a blessing to give up alcohol with the promise of having a glass of wine in the kingdom, in Yahweh's soon coming kingdom at the marriage supper. Verse 13, then he said to them, do you not understand this parable? But how then will you understand any parable? And now he goes into the parable of the sower. The sower sowed the word, and so he's talking about the sower here. I'm going to go over to verse 99 and continue here. In the sermon here, Pastor talks about the prophecy in 1 Kings 13:1, where a man of Yahweh went from Jerusalem up to Samaria, and he prophesied against the altar. And he says, this altar, he cried out against the altar by the word of Yahweh, and he said, altar, altar, this is what Yahweh says, behold, a son will be born to the house of David, Yoshiah by name, and upon him he will sacrifice. He's talking to the altar, Pastor says, Yoshiah is going to be born. This prophecy was given 342 years before it actually came to pass. Yahweh is incredible. There is nothing that he hasn't figured out, planned, and nothing will be left undone. This is just an example. Yoshiah was born, and he did exactly what this prophet of Yahweh said that he would do. So in verse 99 here, moving on here, Yeshua said, the sower was sent. That's who I am today. So Yisrayl Abel Hawkins is saying, I am the sower in this generation. That's who the priests of Yahweh are, because I'm sending the priests, I'm sending teachers right now. We're the seed of the witness. We're the seed of Yahweh's last days witness. Yahweh will raise up a branch, he'll raise up a vine, and it will sit at Yahweh's right hand. Who will behold the branch and see to it that the branch does exactly what prophecy shows he's going to do? And that's what's taking place. Yes, it is. That's what's taking place right now. Turning over to page 44, the last page of this sermon here. Verse 14, it says, the sower sows the word of Yahweh. Those by the wayside are those in whom the word, the law, and the prophets is sown. But when they have heard, Satan immediately comes and takes away the word, the law, and the prophets that is sown in their hearts. And Pastor says, so he says, there was a man who said to his sons, don't drink wine anymore. And of course, Satan came along and said, well, there ain't no law that says that. Well, the sower said it. He sure did, and the sower saw the danger in it. Yes, there is a danger in drinking alcohol. So why risk? Why take any risk of that negative influence getting us in trouble? The sower said, don't drink alcohol. Well, let me just want to conclude here. Your whole life is spent on one thing. You can throw it away if you want to, but unless you believe in the one sent, you're not going to make it. That's a fact. It's a simple thing to do, and Yahweh says, he says of me, he says, he's going to be of quick understanding. He's going to bring forth righteousness and salvation. Salvation never given before this time period, and we're getting ready to give salvation, even to those who have died before us, who have authority, and they haven't received it, but they will receive it from you. So praise Yahweh for approaching another Sabbath day.